Hi guys, welcome to Learn with the Between Schools. My name is Dr. Zeeshan Bhatti, and today we're going to talk about JSON. We're going to see how using and processing JSONs can be done using JavaScript in this JavaScript for Dummies course. Alright, so here's a quick overview of what we are going to cover in this session. First, we will start with the basics. What is JSON and why it's such a big deal in modern programming. Then we will delve into advantages and some real-world applications. From there, we will explore the JSON syntax to understand how it's structured. Next, we will get our hands on the JavaScript learning and how to pass JSON strings into an object and how to convert objects into a JSON. Finally, we will tackle 5 projects and see how we can use JSON in our real world data, including fetching data from API, storing app settings, working with nested data, transforming JSONs for the displaying, and validating JSONs, etc. By the end of this session, you will have a solid understanding of how JSON works and how to use it effectively in your project. So, if you're here for the first time and still haven't subscribed, please do subscribe to the channel as I will be making more videos on React, JSON, JavaScript, and Node.js, jQuery, and all the web development technologies using JavaScript regularly, and I'm posting almost twice or thrice a week. So don't forget to subscribe. So now, let's start with the basics. JSON stands for a JavaScript Object Notation, and it's a way to structure data in a format that both humans and machines can understand easily. Okay, so we need to focus on these 2 points. It's easy for humans to read and write. Think of it as a universal translator for data. It can travel between systems, programming languages, and applications without much trouble. JSON is a lightweight, meaning it doesn't have to hold a lot of extra stuff like some older formats such as XML. Plus, it's a super easy to read and write. That's why it has become so popular. Now, let's talk more about why JSON is awesome. First, it's lightweight, which means less data is being sent over the internet, which makes everything go super fast. Especially important for the things like mobile apps and websites. Second, it's a human readable. The human readable part makes it much more easier and simpler and intuitive format for developers. You don't need to be a programming genius to understand what's going on in a JSON file. Third, it works with pretty much every language independently, regardless of what you're doing. For example, you can use JSON with Python, with Java, with C Sharp, and you name it. This makes JSON the go-to choice for data sharing. Finally, because everyone uses it, it becomes the standard for API and web services. If you're working with any modern application, you're almost using JSON in one way or another. And you're guaranteed to be hooked to JSON because it's such an amazing format. JSON is everywhere. Now, talking about applications, it's like the glue that holds the internet together nowadays. If you are using an API, whether to get weather data, fetch a user's profiles, or interact with the payment gateway, JSON is likely, most probably 90%, 99%, you would be using JSON because it's the most likely format being used. Many apps also use JSON for storing configuration settings like dark mode to toggle or language preferences. Database like MongoDB, they store data in a JSON-like formats. And in mobile apps, JSON is often the medium through which data is sent and received between the apps and the server. In short, if you're building anything that connects to the internet, you're likely to be working with JSON. Let's break down the syntax. JSON data is built on a key value pair. A key is always a string, and a value can be one of the 6 data types. Okay, so here we have a key and we have a value. The value can be of any data type. It can be a string, number, boolean, null, object, or any other thing. It's important to note that the string must be endorsed in a double quotation marks. So if you are using a string, it is meaning that you are using this double quotation marks here. These double quotation marks indicate that you are using a string. No single quotes allowed here. JSON is a strict but a logical. So if you use a single quotation marks, JSON will generate an error. It will not be able to process it. You can also nest objects and arrays to structure complex data. For example, you might have a key called user and the value could be another object with the key like name, age, and address. It's like digital a Russian nesting doll for our data. So in this case, we have a nested key, and then it again contains another sub key value, which is again a nested thing. So we have what we call JSON. Inside one JSON, we have another JSON object. A nested key value happens. So the key thing to remember is that when we write the JSON, we start with the bracket star bracket close, indicates the block of a JSON. Then we have something called a key. A key can be any standard name inside inverted quotation marks. And then we have a value. Again, if it's string, you provided it with inverted quotations. If it is just a string, you can write it in a normal form. Or if it's not a string, it's a number, you can write it in a normal form. You can use an array as well. So in this case, we have an array within a string as well. Okay, and at the same time, object as well. So we have an array, we have an object, or another JSON object, in fact, in this case, as a part of its value as well. Remember, we have again the same logic. Here we have what we call the key. So this becomes my key, colon, this becomes the value. That's it. That's the whole logic of JSON is. So if you look at it, this is the entire JSON that we have available. We have a key and value. That's it. That's the JSON. That's the simplicity of JSON. Now, how do we actually use JSON in JavaScript? The two main operations are JSON.parse and JSON.stringify. So we're going to talk extensively about these things. JSON variable, we create a variable, and then we're going to use this method JSON.parse. And then the second is JSON.stringify. Not this one, sorry, this is just creating a variables. So we're going to use JSON.parse and JSON.stringify. These are two most commonly used and most important methods when we talk about JSON. JSON parse takes a JSON string and turns it into a JavaScript object that you can work with. So the first thing is converting JSON into JavaScript. To do that, to convert any given standard JSON into a JavaScript, we use JSON.parse. So that's this main use. This is a super useful when you get the data from an API. So when you read the data and fetch the data from an API, you probably will be returned with a JSON string. So you use the JSON and then convert that JSON into a JavaScript. Once you do that, now you have a JavaScript object that you can easily parse and work with. On the other hand, JSON stringify, this one, does the opposite. It takes a JavaScript object and turns it into a JSON string, which is great when you need to send the data back to the server. So here we take the JSON object and then we convert it into, we take the JavaScript object and we convert it into JSON using this stringify method. Okay, so this stringify converts JavaScript into JSON. The .parse method converts JSON into JavaScript, the vice versa method. In this examples, we have again a simple variable that has our JavaScript object notation data. Inside the single quotations, we have name value pair inside the curly brackets. So this becomes our JavaScript. So now, this becomes our JSON. So now to convert this JSON into a JavaScript, we use JSON as a class object name. By default built into the system, we don't need to do anything. Then we use .parse method. Again, it exists by default in the library. You just pass this variable value here. So it's going to take this variable that is basically containing a JSON data and it's going to parse it, convert it into an JavaScript object. Now you can say, hey, object dot name, and it's going to print John for us because this is the object name printed here. Similarly, we have JavaScript object. Now again, the key difference between JavaScript object and JSON is in JavaScript object, the key itself actually is just written as a normal name or normal variable. In JSON, the key itself is actually also written as a string. So key also comes inside the inverted quotation marks. Notice here. Okay, everything else inside your JavaScript is in a normal key and its value is in string form. If it's integer, it's just in normal form. However, in JSON, we have inverted quotations. The key itself is inverted quotations. The value depends on the type of data we have. So in this case, the key is inverted quotations. So this is my key. The value, because it's an integer, does not need a key. Inverted quotations. Okay, so that's how the two methods are working inside JavaScript. Here's our first real world example, fetching the data from an API. So imagine you are building a web page that displays user profiles. Using fetch method, you can make an HTTP request to an API. The API sends the data in the JSON format. So here, using this fetch, we are requesting data from an API. Okay, so this is using JavaScript. So fetching the data from an API is actually done here. So you do need to know the API location. So this is our main API address. We use the fetch method. To do using this fetch method, we can make an HTTP request to this API. Then the API sends back the data in a JSON format. So we expect and we hope that this will give the data back to us in a JSON format. So by calling this .json method on the response, you are passing the data into a usable JavaScript object. You can then manipulate it, display it on a web page, or do whatever you need. This is a foundation of most modern web apps that need to read the API. So actually we are using this fetch method. This fetch method will return an JSON data. So this line will actually read the JSON method. So we are saying response arrow function response.json. So whatever response we have got, parse this JSON method. So this JSON on the response is basically going to parse the data into a JavaScript object. So here we are converting data into a JavaScript. Okay, so we will convert it into a JavaScript. Then from here, that JavaScript is actually printed on our console.log. So we are saying, hey, then data, use the arrow function to convert to print the data on a console. Simple as that. So what seems a very difficult thing, see how easily is done using JSON. Let's move to something practical. Storing configuration data. Here we are using the browser's local storage to save settings like a theme and a language. So we have a theme called dark and a language called US. And it can be any other language for that matter, depends on what you want to do. The key step is converting the config object into a JSON string using the JSON stringify method. This thing. So we have a config and we're converting it into a JSON thing. So from JavaScript, we are converting into JSON. Okay, so when we need to use the data later, we retrieve it and parse it back to an object and JSON parse. This approach ensures that the data is stored as text but can easily be converted back into something JavaScript can work with. So remember, whenever you need to work with it, you need to use JSON parse. So initially, we save the data in our app config using from JavaScript to JSON. So this data will actually be saved as a JSON form. Then when we need to actually process and read it, we again use this approach to convert our data from this app config, which holds the JSON data, back into JavaScript object, which then can be used. So this way we save the information, then which type of theme, language, or whatever information user is doing into a file using JSON format. When needed, it needs to be again converted back into JavaScript using JSON.parse. So here we used again the stringify and parse method. This is a simple JavaScript approach that allows us to save the data in a file called app.config and then read it back later on and get information what we need. So nested JSON data is a common, especially when dealing with APIs or databases. Here, how you can access values is nested structure issue. So for instance, in this example, to get the city, you just chain the keys together. Data dot user dot details dot city. It's a straightforward once you understand the structure, but always check your JSONs carefully to avoid the runtime errors. So what we're doing here is we have a constant data. It contains a user, and then this user is actually a key object, and then bracket becomes its first value. So within this value, again we have details, so which again becomes a key value. So if I put it down in general sense, okay, let me show you this one. What it means that first we have this data. Okay, this is one. Then we go and we use user. This is the second nested data. Then and we go and use the details. This is the third data. Okay, so within data we again have city. So now what we're doing is we are trying to process the data. So first we go and we say, hey, go inside the data. Then inside the dot is basically the connection operator. So saying that, hey, data, inside the data we have something called a user, which is the second value here. So inside the user, now we have something called a details. So inside from the user, we again have something called details. Okay, so this here is actually, in fact, the third level is detail. Inside the details, now we have something called city, which is actually the main value we want to achieve. So what we're doing here is what we call the nested object. So inside our main data, okay, which is the first structure, we have what we call our user, meaning we have another box that is contains user. Inside this box we have now another u box called details, this like this. Inside the details now we have information which can be anything. For example, we have age, we had city. Okay, so now we want to access city. So because we want to access this city, we are using the basic nested structure. So we're saying, hey, first go inside the data. First go inside the data, then go inside the data you will find a user. So now go and find this second user. Inside the user you will find details. Now go here, find the details. Inside the details you will find city. So here. So this is how we access the nested JSON object structure. Here we have a list of products and we want to format their names and prices for display. Using JavaScript map method, we loop through each product and create a new array with the formatted strings. This approach is super efficient for transforming JSON data into a user-friendly format. So we create a very simple list of products. Then this is the products.map function. And we are now processing this map function into what we call our JSON format data. Okay, so this is again a common practice and a very useful approach for transforming JSON data as per your need, as per your requirement. Let's look at another example. So this last example, we validate JSONs. Sometimes you will deal with JSON from external sources and need to ensure that it's valid before using it. This function tries to pass the string, and if it fails, it catches the error and returns false. This is a simple yet powerful technique for error proofing your code. So here we say constant is valid JSON and we pass it a string. We give this an arrow function, bracket start, bracket close. We use the try block here and a catch block here. So try catch are sometimes known as exception, or usually from Java they are known as exception handling. Okay, exception handling means catching runtime errors, errors that don't occur while you code but occur at runtime while your code is executing. To catch and handle and ensure that the program doesn't crash but gives a nice message, we do this try and catch. So this is typical JavaScript. So inside it, we are using JSON.parse string. So whatever string we are getting here, pass that string, hoping that this would be a standard what JavaScript object. So we are just saying, hey, return true. If there is no error here, return true. If there is an error, catch and return false, indicating that, hey, if there's a problem, we will have true. If there's no problem, we will, if there's a problem, we will have false. If there's no problem, we will get true. So this small code snippet allows us to ensure that our JSON that we have received here is valid. This is that concludes the whole session. If you want to access all the source codes, do check out my website, code with Dr. Zeeshan Bhatti, okay.com. I have a long name for some reason, but please go visit this blog. You can find entire all these code examples there with some detailed instructions of how things are working. Hope you have found this lecture interesting, and if you would like to see more videos on such type, please leave a comment. Don't forget to like, and still haven't subscribed it, please do subscribe this channel. Thank you for watching, and before you go, check out these next cool videos on JavaScript and JSON. My name is Dr. Zeeshan, signing off.